My name is Oakley Jensen. For 7 years, my official title at GeoLink Global was Senior Geospatial Data Scientist, a name as gray and sterile as the brushed steel and glass of our corporate headquarters in Chicago. In the quiet, caffeinated corners of the data science department, they had a different name for me. They called me the cartographer of chaos. It was said with a mix of respect and a little bit of fear. I was the woman who could see the ghost of a typhoon in a single data point from a weather buoy in the Pacific, mapping its future impact on our shipping lanes before the storm even had a name. I could predict a supply chain collapse in the Midwest from a subtle shift in rail freight prices in the East. My job was to stare into the roaring statistical noise of the global economy and find the signal, the melody, the truth. They saw me as their oracle, a human algorithm. They forgot that the one who draws the map is the one who knows where all the treasures are buried, and all the bodies. Last Tuesday at precisely 3:00 p.m., they offered me a 7-figure check and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement to pursue other opportunities. It was presented in a quiet, airless HR conference room by Lydia Frost, a woman with a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. They called it a golden parachute, a generous recognition of my years of service. They thought it was about silencing a brilliant but difficult employee who was standing in the way of progress. They didn't realize it was a desperate, clumsy attempt to prevent me from testifying in a federal investigation they hadn't even known was coming. That check is still sitting on my coffee table, its 7 figures a monument to their arrogance. The NDA went through my personal shredder last night. It made a deeply satisfying sound, like crisp autumn leaves underfoot. They assumed I would be devastated by the firing. Angry. They were right about the anger, but wrong about its target. The truth is, I meticulously engineered my own professional execution. I needed to be on the outside, a free agent untethered by employment contracts and the constant, watchful eye of corporate IT. I needed them to sever my access, to wipe my credentials, to make me a ghost in their machine, because only then could I activate the Atlas protocol. It was a dormant, deep system audit I had architected 2 years prior, after a much smaller, almost disaster taught me about the fragility of corporate integrity. The protocol was my digital ghost, a set of complex scripts buried in the bedrock of the server architecture, designed for one purpose: to automatically trigger the moment my user ID and encrypted key were permanently deleted. It was my dead man's switch. And Dorian Pikes, with his charming smile and billion-dollar ambition, had just walked right up and pressed it for me. Everything truly began with Project Chimera. It was the deal of the decade, a $2 billion merger with a Silicon Valley startup that promised to revolutionize the logistics industry. Their core technology, a predictive AI algorithm, was supposed to be the holy grail. It would optimize our entire global network, rerouting ships, trucks, and planes in real time to avoid bottlenecks before they even formed. The board was ecstatic. Wall Street was buzzing. And our new COO, Dorian Pikes, the man who had personally chosen me to lead the technical due diligence, was already being hailed as a visionary. There was just one fatal flaw in his vision. The technology was a sham. It wasn't just buggy or overhyped. It was a sophisticated, beautifully packaged lie. I spent 3 weeks locked in a data vault, sleeping in 4-hour shifts on a cot in my office, fueled by cold coffee and a growing sense of dread. I wasn't just analyzing their code. I was cross-referencing their performance claims against raw, unfiltered global transit data. And the numbers didn't just fail to add up, they screamed fraud. Their efficiency gains were statistical mirages, created by cherry-picking data and running simulations in a closed loop that ignored real-world variables like weather, labor strikes, and port congestion. The graphs in their pitch deck were perfect, elegant curves. But the world doesn't move in elegant curves. It moves in jagged, unpredictable fits and starts. What I was looking at was the data equivalent of a forged masterpiece. My models, when fed their algorithm, predicted a catastrophic, cascading systems failure within 6 months of full integration. We weren't buying a competitive advantage. We were buying a multi-billion-dollar time bomb. Before Chimera, my work was my sanctuary. I believed in GeoLink's mission. I found a deep, almost spiritual satisfaction in bringing order to the world's chaos. I respected Dorian Pikes. He had been promoted to COO 6 months earlier, a rising star from the world of finance. He was different from the old guard of logistics lifers. He was charming, articulate, and he seemed to genuinely understand and value the power of data. He made me feel seen. He called me his secret weapon in meetings. He made me feel like the future of the company rested on the integrity of my work. That's why the betrayal felt like a physical blow. I scheduled a private meeting in his corner office overlooking the Chicago River. I walked in with an 80-page report, its sheer weight a testament to the certainty of my findings. It was the best work of my life, a clear, methodical, and irrefutable deconstruction of the Chimera fraud. I walked him through it page by page. I showed him the manipulated code, the impossible performance graphs, the final, terrifying projection of our entire network grinding to a halt. He listened with a performance of deep, unwavering concern. He steepled his fingers, his expensive watch catching the light. He nodded, his brow furrowed. He called my work extraordinary and admirably diligent. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Oakley, this is why you are so valuable to us. You protect this company. Let me handle this. I'll take it from here." I left that office feeling like I had just saved the world, or at least our small corner of it. The sense of relief was intoxicating. I had done my job. I had spoken truth to power, and power had listened. 2 days later, Dorian presented his final recommendation to the board. He used my slides, my charts, the elegant, damning data visualizations I had poured my soul into. He presented them as the product of his own team's deep dive. I could have forgiven that. Corporate life is full of credit stealers. But he did something far more sinister. He kept all of my data, all of my evidence, but he surgically altered the conclusion. My final slide, the one titled in bold red letters, "Conclusion, Catastrophic Risk and Evidence of Fraud," was now red-idled in a calming blue. "Conclusion, Promising Integration Potential with Manageable RISKs." He had taken my meticulously constructed warning, my fire alarm, and told the board it was the sound of a cash register. The final, public humiliation came the following week. At a company-wide town hall, Dorian stood on stage, a conquering hero, announcing the successful completion of the Chimera acquisition. He spoke of bold futures and the courage to innovate. And then his eyes scanned the crowd and found mine. A flicker of something, triumph, pity, contempt, passed over his face before he addressed the entire company. "In any great leap forward," he announced, his voice booming with false sincerity, "we must be wary of the anchor draggers, those voices of extreme caution who are so focused on the 1% risk that they fail to see the 99% opportunity." He didn't use my name, he was too clever for that, but in a room of 500 people, he had put a target on my back. He had branded my integrity as fear, my diligence as dissent. He made me the enemy of the very future I was trying to protect. I knew then that I couldn't stop this from the inside. He had outmaneuvered me. He had used my own work against me. So I built them one final test of character, a moral off-ramp on the highway to disaster. In my final, approved integration forecast model, a model they would rely on for months, I deliberately embedded a tiny, elegant flaw. It was a single line of code that introduced a minuscule rounding error in a freight capacity calculation for the port of Los Angeles. On its own, it was statistically insignificant, easily dismissed as noise, but it was a loose thread. For any competent analyst who took the time to investigate why that specific number was microscopically off, the thread would lead them to a series of other subtle anomalies, which would, in turn, lead them to the core fabrication in Chimera's data. It was a breadcrumb trail for a conscience. Using an encrypted email client from a public library computer, I sent an anonymous message to Emil Kovic, the head of the risk analysis department. I'd always known Emil to be a straight shooter, a meticulous, by-the-book analyst who valued accuracy above all else. He was a good man with a wife and 2 young kids. The email was just one sentence. "Suggest you double-check the Q3 freight capacity parameters for the Chimera model. Something feels off." I wasn't giving him the answer. I was just telling him which rock to look under. I gave them one last chance to do the right thing, to find the flaw, to pull the plug, to be the company I once believed they were. I was betting on the integrity of one good man. It was the worst bet I ever made. The first ripple appeared less than 24 hours after I sent my anonymous email. From a secure monitoring script I had left running on a forgotten corner of the network, a ghost of my own making, I watched the log files. At 10:17 a.m., a query was initiated by user eKovic against the specific dataset containing the Chimera integration model. It was a simple read request, but to me, it was a flare in the darkness. Emil had taken the bait. He was pulling the thread. My plan from this point was one of patient, predatory observation. I had built my own dashboard, a secret window into the company's soul. It tracked access to key documents, flagged keywords in executive emails, and monitored calendar appointments. It was a map of their movements, and for the next 48 hours, I watched Emil Kovic navigate the maze I had created for him. I saw him run the numbers again and again. I saw the logs of his late-night sessions, the frantic queries growing more specific, more targeted. He wasn't just checking my work, he was replicating it. He was seeing the monster for himself. At 2:30 a.m. on the second day, he accessed my original, buried 80-page report. The log entry was stark: E. Kovic, red/project chimera/due diligence/final report Ojensen, PDF. He had found the body. The next morning, my dashboard lit up. A calendar invite created by Emil. Urgent, chimera model discrepancy. The only required attendee was Dorian Pikes. This was it, the moment of truth. My protocol couldn't record audio, but it could track the digital footprints of the aftermath. Less than 5 minutes after the meeting was scheduled to end, I saw the evidence of Dorian's masterful, toxic manipulation. A new, restricted folder was created on the server, accessible only to Dorian and Emil. Title: Project Chimera, Risk Refinement. Then came the email from Dorian to Emil, my keyword tracker catching it instantly. The subject was innocuous. Following up. The body was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. Emil, it began, excellent work flagging this. This is the kind of proactive diligence I value. However, we need to be strategic. Presenting this as a flaw could create unnecessary panic with the board and our new partners. I need you to lead a small, discreet task force. Frame this not as a problem, but as an opportunity for further optimization. I want you to run a full diagnostic and prepare a final report that confirms the model's fundamental integrity while suggesting minor calibration. I trust your judgment to find the right conclusion. The company is counting on you. He hadn't told Emil to lie. He had given him an order to find a truth that suited the narrative. He was testing Emil's ambition against his integrity, and he was holding Emil's career in the balance. The task force was a ghost army. The logs showed no other employees were ever added to the restricted folder. It was just Emil, alone with his conscience and his closing window of opportunity. For a week, I watched him wrestle with the choice. The digital evidence painted a portrait of a man in torment. He would work late into the night, running simulations that confirmed the disaster, only to spend the next morning drafting reports filled with corporate platitudes and reassuring jargon. He was a man trying to find a mathematical way to justify a lie. The final act of his professional surrender came on a Friday afternoon. An email from Emil Kovic was sent to Dorian Pikes. Attached was a document, Chimera Risk Refinement Final Report, PDF. I accessed it through my backdoor. The report was 20 pages of beautifully crafted nonsense. It acknowledged minor statistical anomalies and recommended ongoing monitoring, but its conclusion was unequivocal. The core architecture of the Chimera model is robust, and it poses no material risk to GeoLink's operational stability. I felt a cold, heavy knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, weary disappointment. I had held out a sliver of hope that one good man would choose the harder, right path. But Dorian knew his people. He knew which levers to pull, which fears to exploit. He hadn't broken Emil, he had simply allowed Emil to break himself. The system immediately began to erase the trail. My original report was moved to a deep archive folder with restricted access permissions. The server logs showing Emil's initial frantic queries were scrubbed, flagged as routine system maintenance. They were paving over the crime scene with digital asphalt. Then came the final, pathetic confirmation. A notification popped up on my personal phone. LinkedIn, a new message. It was from Emil Kovic. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened it. The message was short, the last gasp of a drowning conscience. Oakley, I'm sorry, I have a family to think about. I took a screenshot. I saved it to a secure, encrypted drive under the file name Exhibit a Cowardice, PNG. It was the last piece of evidence I needed. His apology was not for me, it was for himself. He had sold his integrity, and he wanted my absolution as part of the price. He would not get it. With Emil neutralized and the evidence buried, there was only one loose end left, me. I knew it was coming. They had to get me out of the building before the first real cracks from the Chimera integration started to show. They needed a scapegoat in advance, and they needed to make sure the one person who could say, "I told you so," was bound by a gag order. I spent the next few days quietly preparing for my own departure. I purged my work computer of anything personal and migrated my critical, secret files to the cloud. I was a ghost preparing for her own exorcism. The summons came the following Tuesday. The email was from HR, the subject line a sterile meeting request. The air in the conference room was thick with a cloying, artificial politeness. The HR representative, Lydia Frost, sat across from me. My direct manager, a man who had avoided eye contact with me for a week, sat beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. They slid the folder across the table. Inside was the severance agreement, the 7-figure check, the NDA. They delivered the pre-written script about restructuring and strategic realignment. They said my role was being eliminated. I didn't listen to the words. I listened to the silence between them. I watched the nervous tick in my manager's eye. I felt the cold, hard certainty of my own plan clicking into place. This wasn't a firing. It was a coronation. They thought they were ending my career, but they were about to launch it into a completely new orbit. "We know this is difficult," Lydia Frost said, her voice dripping with false empathy. "Please, take your time to review the documents. We think you'll find the offer is very generous." I didn't open the folder. I pushed it back across the table. I stood up. "It won't be necessary," I said, my voice calm and even. "I accept." I saw a flicker of surprise on their faces. They had expected me to fight, to argue, to be emotional. They were not prepared for quiet compliance. I turned and walked toward the door, my security badge in my hand. An escort was waiting outside to walk me to my desk, to watch me pack my few personal belongings into a cardboard box. A corporate funeral procession. As I walked out of that conference room, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a profound, crystalline calm. I felt the tumblers of a massive lock falling into place. As I walked across the polished marble floor of the lobby for the last time, past the giant, gleaming Geolink logo, I felt a vibration from the burner phone in my pocket. It was a single, automated notification from my private server. A simple message, but it made my heart beat faster. User: O. Jensen. Status: DELETED. Protocol: Atlas. Status: initiated. The dead man's switch had been flipped. The clock was now ticking. They thought they had silenced me. They had no idea they had just given me the microphone. The real audit was about to begin. The Atlas protocol was not a bomb, it was an earthquake. It didn't destroy, it revealed. The moment my credentials were wiped, the protocol began its silent, methodical work. It was designed not as an attack, but as a truth and reconciliation commission executed by algorithm. Its first action was to compile a single, immutable dossier. It gathered my original 80-page report, Dorian's altered presentation slides, the logs of Emil's frantic research, the evidence of the subsequent data scrub, the keyword-flagged emails, and the final, damning LinkedIn message from Emil. It packaged everything into a password-protected file, a digital atom bomb of pure, unassailable fact. Its second action was to wait. The protocol was programmed with a 72-hour delay, 3 days of silence. 3 days for them to believe they had won, to toast their success, to finalize the disastrous Chimera deal. It was a silence designed to amplify the coming storm. I spent those 3 days in a self-imposed exile in my own apartment. I didn't answer calls. I didn't check the news. I went for long walks along the shore of Lake Michigan, the cold wind a welcome, clarifying slap in the face. It wasn't a celebration. It was a period of mourning, for the company I had believed in, for the work I had loved, and for the colleagues who had chosen silence over integrity. At precisely 9:00 a.m. on the third day, the earthquake hit. The Atlas protocol executed its final command. It sent a single, anonymous email. The recipients were the 9 members of the Geolink Board of Directors, a senior investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal I had long admired, and, for good measure, the public inbox of the SEC's Division of Enforcement. The subject line was simple: Project Chimera, an independent audit. The body of the email contained only a link to the secure dossier and a single sentence: "The truth is in the numbers." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. I watched it unfold from the outside, a ghost observing her own haunting. The first sign was a sudden, unexplained halt in Geolink stock trading that afternoon, citing pending news. Then came the first whispers on financial news networks, rumors of an emergency board meeting. By evening, the story had broken. The Wall Street Journal published a meticulously researched exposé, citing an anonymous, high-level internal source and detailing the entire Chimera fraud. They had independently verified my findings. My numbers, as always, were correct. The board, faced with a federal investigation and a public relations nightmare of their own making, acted with the brutal, self-preservational efficiency of a cornered animal. Dorian Pikes was fired. The $2 billion Chimera deal was terminated, with Geolink citing material misrepresentations discovered during a final review. Emil Kovic was quietly let go, a footnote in the collapse he had enabled. They were amputating the gangrenous limbs to save the body. The victory, when it came, felt hollow. I had been proven right. I had saved the company from its own greed, but I had lost my faith in the process. The world felt a little darker, a little more compromised. I had won the battle, but the war for corporate integrity felt endless. A week later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Constance Blackwood, no relation to Dorian. She was the widow of the company's founder, a formidable woman in her late 70s who sat on the board as a keeper of her husband's legacy. She had been the one, I later learned, who had forced the emergency meeting and demanded immediate action after receiving the anonymous email. "Oakley," she said, her voice crisp and clear, without a hint of apology. "I'm the interim chairwoman. The board has authorized me to make this right. We've voided the NDA you refused to sign. We are also wiring you a settlement. It's 8 figures, not as a reward for what you did, but as damages for what we failed to do." I was silent. The money was abstract, unreal. "That isn't why I'm calling," she continued. "I read your original report, all 80 pages. It was brilliant. It was the work of someone who cared. This company lost its way when it lost people like you. I want to offer you a new position, not as an employee, but as an advisor to the board. A new role, Chief Integrity Officer. Your only job would be to tell us the truth, especially when we don't want to hear it." I was stunned. I had expected a check. I had not expected a compass. "I need to think about it," I managed to say. "Take all the time you need," she said. "The job is yours if you want it. GeoLink needs to find its true north again. I believe you're the one who holds the map." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The anger that had fueled me for months had finally dissipated, leaving behind a quiet, aching void. The severance check on my coffee table suddenly looked small and insignificant. Vengeance was a fire that burned bright and hot, but it left you standing in the ashes. What Constance was offering was something else entirely. It was a chance to build. I used a portion of the settlement to start the Atlas Foundation, a nonprofit that provides legal and financial support to whistleblowers in the tech and logistics industries. It was a way to ensure that no one else would have to choose between their conscience and their career the way Emil Kovic had. It was my way of building a shield for others. A few months later, I am standing on a stage at a conference on data ethics. The room is filled with young, brilliant minds, the next generation of cartographers. I tell them my story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a cautionary tale about the seduction of silence. "They taught me a valuable lesson at GeoLink," I say, my voice steady. "Success isn't your title. It isn't the size of your bonus. It's the ability to look at yourself in the mirror each morning and recognize the person staring back. It's about knowing your own true north." After the talk, a young woman, a data scientist from a small startup, approaches me. She looks nervous, but her eyes are bright with resolve. "I think," she says, her voice barely a whisper, "that my company is lying about its data. I don't know what to do." I look at her and I see a younger version of myself, but this time she isn't alone. "Let's go get some coffee," I say, a genuine smile forming on my face for the first time in a long time. "Tell me everything. My foundation has some people who can help." In that moment, standing under the bright lights of the conference hall, I realized the truth. I had set out to burn down a corrupt system. But the real healing, the real victory, wasn't in the fire. It was in planting a new garden in the ashes. It was in handing someone else a compass so they could find their own way. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally drawing a map that led somewhere I truly wanted to go.